Hey, History 8. This is our lecture video for Monday, April 20th. Today, I love this chapter. I know you guys know that because I said that last week, but I absolutely love this chapter. I think it's fun. We get to talk about cowboys and outlaws. So yeah, I hope you like the talks that we're having. Friday, I think, is the day that we're going to go, like, I'm going to pick a couple outlaws and talk about them a little bit more in detail than, like, your book goes into, because I think it's exciting and fun and awesome. So that's just kind of, yeah, what we're talking about today is cowboys. And I have a little bit of, like, I have some truths about the Wild West in here, or the Old West, that I'm going to kind of share because I think they're fun. And yeah, so I hope you enjoy these videos this week. I think this chapter, you know, some chapters are just not as exciting to talk about. They're important, but they're not, you know, but this is like cowboys and Indians and all kinds of cool stuff and outlaws and, you know, all kinds of cool stuff. So, and I do have some pictures today, and there will be one video, I believe, that I will be posting. Actually, while I'm talking, I'm going to check it out. So I will be posting a video for you to watch. It's about cowboys and cattle drives. It's not long, I don't believe. And so, yeah, check that one out too, because it will be something to watch. And yeah, it's 2 minutes. So I think, well, there's an ad. 1 second. There's an ad. I'm just kind of checking out. This ad is really weird. It's how to exercise your jaw. This video is 6 minutes, but it's, you know, it's about cowboys and cattle drives. So check it out because I think you'll like it. But anyway, so this chapter, like I said, all about the West, kind of closing out the West. We're kind of almost done with settling everything. And this is just kind of, you know, how it works. Now, cattlemen, super important, and they did play an important role in the development of the American West. I think people think, though, that cowboys were around for a long time. They really weren't. And so they actually tamed a lot of the new frontier than the miners or the farmers did. But again, it wasn't that long. It really didn't start until after the Civil War, which we've talked about in history and in lit. The Civil War ended in 1865, and the peak of the cowboys was in 1880, like the mid 1880s. And then by the early 1890s, it was kind of over. You know, it was just legend, and, you know, so it's kind of crazy. We have all these Western movies and stuff about cowboys and stuff, but they really weren't like a thing that long. And so kind of crazy, you know, like 25 years and then it's over. But, you know, it's there's a lot of just, I think, like, mystery around it. But I will say, like, it's not as, if you look at this, it's not glamorous. Like, it's not a glamorous life. It was hard. So we're going to get into some of that. Now, in the 25 years that cattle drives were a big thing, about 40,000 men drove an estimated 10 million herd of cattle over, like, a network of trails, not rails. We'll get to that in a minute. Trails, and most of these led north from Texas, and almost 1/4 of the cowboys in the cattle drive were African American. And that's something to really, I think, you know, like in movies and stuff, you don't see that. They kind of left out a whole large group, like 25% of all cowboys. And so I do have some pictures. Here's our first picture, okay? You can kind of see, they usually had something covering their face. I just apparently hit a button and a video started, sorry. They had something to cover their face, you know, like a handkerchief or something. They had their hat to block out the sun and the wind. They did have chaps in their boots. They did have spurs. So, you know, it is kind of like what we picture in movies. I think, though, movies make it way more glamorous than it really is. I do have a picture of, this is something, this is like a, I don't know if it's a movie or like a book cover. It says True Sensational and Little Known Stories from History, and it's Black Cowboys of the Old West. And that's kind of another example of an outfit, and it kind of shows you, you know, like, all cowboys were not white. I think everybody just kind of assumes, and that's not true. So that's something you can learn from this chapter as well. Now, the term cowboy was fitting. It just kind of fits. That's their job. Oh, hey, caught it. Okay. Sorry, hit that with my book and then it started to fall down. So you never know what you'll see in these videos. So yeah, the term cowboy was fitting. They also had a lot of artwork during this time. Frederick Remington, Olaf Seltzer, they had faces of these young cowboys. And most of them were under the age of 20. Like, they would do it for a couple years, then they would settle down, get married, and become a farmer or a rancher. So it wasn't like, it wasn't glamorous, you know, like, you didn't have full full-blown adults generally doing this. You know, you didn't have 40-year-olds doing this. They would generally run the farm, and they would have people go and, you know, run the cattle for them. Okay, so there were growing herds, especially in Texas, of what are called the longhorn cattle. I don't know if you've ever seen them. I got to see them in person one time in Gatlinburg, Tennessee, at one of the shows we were at, and they are so cool looking. Look at this Texas longhorn. Look at that, so cool. And so they were wild cows, cattle. And so they just see them and they're like, man, I bet they would bring in a lot of money at market. And so people in the eastern cities, think about like New York City, okay? There are no like random wild cattle out there. And so people in Texas were like, you know, I bet if we took this to, you know, got this to New York City in some way, we'd be able to make a lot of money. They were right. But it's a lot of work to get it to New York City. This is the thing. There's no railroads that go into Texas at this point. Remember we talked about, I don't remember if that was this chapter or last chapter. There's railroads going all the way across the United States, but none of them at this point go right down through Texas. There's one they build later that goes all the way across, but it's not there yet. And so they have to bring the cattle up north. And so cattle could be... could cost about $5 when fed on the open range on free public lands. It cost about 1 cent a mile to drive them north, and then they could sell them for between $25 and $50 a head. That's a huge profit margin. And so they know it's totally worth it. And so what they would do is they would move herds. And what they did first is they would move them across the Red River in 1866. And I do have a map that I'll show you guys in just a minute. So the closest railroad at this time was in Missouri, Sedalia, Missouri. And so cowboys would go on the Sedalia Trail. There's a lot of problems. And I forgot, I printed this one the other day. I do have a picture of another group of cowboys. I mean, can you ever have enough pictures of cowboys? Seriously. So, I don't know what's happening in my video. My computer is freaking out. Okay. So anyway, I'm just going to exit out of that because I don't want to start playing. Okay. So, yeah, you have these guys, they're moving north. But one of the problems they were having is that they had trouble driving the cattle through the forest and brush of eastern Oklahoma and southern Missouri. Second, they had these ticks. They were called cattle ticks, and they would stick on the Texas Longhorns for hundreds of miles. Now, the ticks did not affect them because they had built an immunity to this. But the ones in Oklahoma and Missouri did not have an immunity, and so they would catch what's called Texas fever. And I do have a note here saying, where does it say what it causes? They called it also the Spanish fever, splenic fever, and redwater fever. I don't know why it doesn't say what it caused though. And so what it would do is it would fill from blood from one cow, and then it would drop to the ground where it would lay eggs. And then the ticks that hatched from that also had this disease in them, and it would get onto other cows and infect them. And they didn't have the technology to kill these ticks. I don't know why it doesn't say, like, does it kill the cow? I'm assuming it's not. It must be bad for the cow. I'm guessing it. Oh, yeah, it does say many animals died from outbreaks of Texas fever. Sorry, missed that line. So anyway, so obviously farmers are not okay, or owners of cows in Oklahoma and Missouri are not okay with this disease. And so there was a law passed to try to prohibit the passage of Texas herds, but people didn't listen to that law, and so people took it in their own hands. They had shotgun quarantines, kind of funny because we're in a quarantine, but, and they would have a gun and they would sit there and they would shoot if, you know, Texas cows started coming through. Then in 1867, Joseph G. McCoy, he was a shrewd cattle broker from Illinois, and he built large corrals in Abilene, Kansas, and what he would do is he would ship cattle to the Chicago stockyards, and this cut the distance because you could actually go to Kansas instead of all the way to Missouri, so that makes it a little bit shorter for them. And it also makes it so they don't have to go through that one trail where they have people shooting at them. This made the Chisholm Trail the busiest one to go north. So this trail took its name from an Indian trader, Jesse Chisholm, and he used the 225-mile trail to take supplies to the Indian Territory, which is now Oklahoma. Now, they did have a lot of problems still. I forgot to show you the picture. So here's the picture, like the map, okay? And you can kind of see like the different ways they would go. And if you look at, let's see where's that one at. You can kind of see, like, at first they were going, you know, up this one. I think you can see this. And then they kind of went a little bit. Here's Abilene. They went a little bit further west. And then there's railroads that finally come up here and they can connect there instead. And so it kind of makes things easier for them. So, and so they just were a lot of difficulties. One of the issues is they're going through Indian territory, and there's the Chickasaw Indians, and there was like a tax. So in order for the cows to graze there, they had to pay 50 cents a head on the cattle. Farmers also put up fences to keep the cattle out. That meant less open range. There were also a few watering holes for the cows. And so they kept moving, kind of like I showed you on that map, further west as they headed north. And they also connected with newly extended railroad lines, which I showed you in that map as well, that there were railroads as they went. There were 2 ranchers that were looking for a different route that would go southeast to the Pecos River and then up. And a lot of people were like, oh, that's not possible because there's not water. And they were able to really figure it out. The first time they went, they lost quite a few cattle. And then the second time they didn't lose any because they, I think, figured out what exactly they needed to go, where exactly to go, and what exactly to bring with to make sure the cattle survived. So the cattle drive, now this is the thing, like I said, it was not easy. It took careful planning. A rancher or cattle buyer would set out to gather a herd in the early spring. And what they would do is, I have a thing about a roundup, and a typical day would involve rising before dawn, eating a quick breakfast, and heading out on horses. And they would ride out in a circle that was several miles across, and they would work their way back to camp. And they would pick up all cattle they could find. Some cowboys would branch out to search for any stragglers while the rest of the group continued to move. It might even contain 1,000 cattle by the time they returned to their starting point, and then they would sort the calves and brand them so they knew which farmer owned them, or which, you know, rancher owned them. And then they would gather for supper, and then they would sleep and then get ready for the next day. So it was a lot of work just to herd them. Then they have to kind of take care of them for a while, and then they would take them to market. Now, the trail boss, he was the one kind of in charge of all of this, taking them to the market. He was paid about $125 a month. He was in charge of the men, the equipment, and animals. It was his job to get as many cattle to the market safely as possible. There were usually about 8 cowboys who worked with him, and their price ranged from $25 to $40 a month. There were point men. They would ride in the lead. There were 2 were swing men, and 2 were flank men, and they rode along the sides and just made sure that they didn't wander. And then 2 were dragmen. Now, I don't know about you. I would not want that job. You're behind all the cattle. It's dusty. It probably stinks from like poop. Yeah, not a job I would want. And they kind of stay behind for any stragglers. And then also they have a cook. And the cook kind of had a tough job. They had a covered wagon, but they had to go ahead of the group, and they would ride a couple miles ahead and stop, and they would like make food so that way when they get there, they get a warm meal. But sometimes they had to start at 3 a.m. to start cooking breakfast because they would be on their horses, you know, as quickly as they could. There was usually a wrangler too. He was usually the youngest. He was paid the least, and he took care of the horses and like the riding equipment. And then this is the thing. They would start at daylight, but it's not like you could just go to bed and just think the cows are all going to stay there. So they had people who had to take watch at night and had to kind of circle and make sure that they were safe, because the biggest danger was a stampede. Especially at night, cows would get startled by a noise or really anything, you know, an animal, and then they could start a stampede, and that could be so dangerous for the cowboys and also the cows. And then you might spend days trying to you know, round them all up. So one thing that came into play that was super important was the meat packing industry. Before this time, you know, there were only a couple ways to keep meat. You could dry it like jerky, salting it or pickling it, and that was about it. So you didn't have tons of time to, you know, have fresh meat. Especially if you lived in like big cities on the East Coast, you weren't getting, you know, this meat. And so these 2 guys, Philip Armour and Gustavus Swift, Gustavus, anyway, sorry, Swift, we'll call him Swift. And they were really important to making the meatpacking industry successful. They were trying new things and doing new things to make sure. And they realized that if there was a way that they could get meat to the eastern cities quickly and ship it in large amounts, then they could really make a difference with this meat. And so then they also are going to need more cattle. So that kind of helps both ends of all of this. And the other thing is that if they could ship them quickly and slaughter almost immediately, they wouldn't lose weight. And so they would have larger amounts of weight. So both of them actually end up moving to Chicago, and they open packing plants. And Armour was the first one, and he had hogs and steers. And they would have them move down narrow wooden chutes. I am not going to go into all the details. Like, there's details in your book. I'm not going to read them all. I do have a picture of a hog meat packing plant. It's not gross. It's literally just, you can see all the hogs getting ready for slaughter. Okay. I'm not going to go into all the details because you can read it if you want, but I'm not going to. Now, one of the smartest things that he did, though, was he would use the animal byproducts. So, like bones, the hides, and other parts of animals that he wouldn't eat. He found other uses. He actually hired scientists and chemists to find uses for them. So, like, they could use the fat to make soap, bones to make glue, and buttons and fertilizer, and then the hides to make soap and shoes, not soap, shoes and gloves. And so that made a huge difference. They said that meat packers used every part of a pig but the squeal. That's a good way to make money. You know, why waste all of that extra parts that you could use? And then Swift also believed that there was a market for fresh meat. So he was trying to find the best ways to get fresh meat out to market. He set up a meatpacking company in Chicago as well, and he started shipping fresh meat across the country. And what he did is he would put the beef on ice in railroad cars. So he would literally take it and put it on ice. Now, this is the thing, though, that meat gets discolored if you put it right on ice. I don't know if you've ever had meat like in your fridge or freezer and it gets freezer burnt. It just is not as good. It doesn't taste as good. Like, it just loses something. And so he found a new way to do it, and there's a picture of it in your book. I'm going to hold it up, but they put the ice they specially made refrigerator cars on trains, and it had like a separate ice bin that kept the whole room cold, or the whole train car cold, and that made a huge difference because it did not ruin the meat. So you can kind of see here. Here are like the animals, and you'll see like the ice here, and it would keep the whole thing cold. Because I have a printed picture of it, but it's just like the train car. So it's not that exciting. I like the picture in your book because you can at least see where it is. And this really made a huge difference for the economy. It boosted the need for meat, but something comes up that kind of ends, actually quite a few things that cause the cattle range, open range cattle industry declining, and their last big drive was completed in 1896. One, meat just gets cheaper because there's more available, and so it's not as hard to find, so it's cheaper. Also, because they're not losing as much meat, you know, you can get meat fresh to market quicker and stuff, meat prices plummet. It became less profitable to have a livestock and to drive them north. But one good thing, though, is that the fact that more people could afford meat. So you have the poorer classes, they can add meat to their diet, and that makes a huge difference in the health of the people of our country. Seriously, it makes a huge difference to have protein in your diet and to really, you know, kind of help with that. So that made a huge difference for our country health-wise. Now, another problem is overgrazing. Just, you know, you have too many cattle eating in the same spots, you know, going through the same trails, and so it causes a lot of issues. And then you have things like blizzards and droughts, and cowboys and cattle all suffered. It talks about in your book, the summer of 1884 was severe drought, and then that winter had this huge blizzard, and then farmers had put in fences, and I don't know if you guys saw this in your book, but like at the end of the winter, they found like 10,000 dead cows along this fence because they just died there. And it talks about just like 50% of the stock in the West died in that winter because it was just that devastating for them. And so this cycle of drought and blizzard really causes a lot of issues. People were asking President Grover Cleveland at the time for help with this. And he pretty much said that they had to figure it out on their own. You know, he said that it wasn't up to the government to help them. And they had to, you know, kind of figure it out themselves. And horse thieves and Indians were also a problem. Another thing, and this one is just so random. It feels random to me, but it's not. I mean, it's something, obviously, but a big one was sheep herders. Sheep just, first of all, they kind of leave a mess. Like in the watering holes and stuff, they left mess, and then cows wouldn't drink that water. They, a lot of times, would eat all of the grass. They wouldn't leave any grass at all. You you know, if they left any grass, they would trample it. And so people were very against sheep, and they end up finding that sheep and cattle cannot survive on the same land because it just doesn't work. And the cowboys felt they were there first, and so sometimes they would actually go and kill sheep herders. It was just kind of craziness. And your code word for the day, I just decided, is sheep. Yep, just sheep. Just send me the code word sheep. It's fun. Okay, so sometimes cowboys would actually go and like murder sheep herders, which is just too bad. Or they would like cause like a stampede of sheep, or they would cause like the sheep to like go over cliffs. Sheep are kind of dumb. I don't know if you've heard that before. And so they would cause them to like go over cliffs and stuff like that. So just all of these problems combined really challenge cowboys. Now, I'm going to share some little facts that are in my book that I thought were pretty interesting. These are truths about the Old West. Buffalo Bill, who's one of those people that there's a ton of stories about, he used special shotgun shells in his rifle when performing his amazing feats of marksmanship. So he had special shells. The West black powder cartridges produced so much smoke on the first shot that taking accurate aim thereafter was difficult because you couldn't see through it. Smokeless powder was not invented until 1895. So there's that. Cowboys did not wear bullets around their belts. They were heavy and expensive, and they would easily be misshapen if a cowboy lay on them. So that's another like little rumor. In 1873, Colt Peacemaker, the handgun of choice in the West, was accurate for only 15 yards. That's it. Then murder was not taken lightly in the real West, even by outlaws. A lot of people assume that like murder was totally acceptable. No, there were people like out there investigating, you know, the murders and the outlaws and that kind of stuff. From the mid 1800s to the early 1900s, perhaps as few as 45 murders occurred in the Old West. That's more murders occur today in any 1 year in Chicago. So yeah, don't think like, you know, thousands of people died or anything. The fast draw on the street is a myth. That wasn't a normal thing that people would go out and just like shoot each other. In a gunfight, no one would let his opponent go for his gun first because reaction time was too slow. Even if a person reacted in 25/100ths of a second, he would be too slow to get off a shot against a professional quick draw artist. So yeah, that's not, you know how they show it in the movies, like 10 paces. Okay, go. You know, that's not how it works. The eagle feather and war bonnet were Sioux adornments like Indians. They were not worn by the Apaches or other fierce Indian tribes. So you see like those, you know, the like Indian headdresses with all the like the feathers and stuff, that was not worn by all of them. Townspeople like to dress in fancy, well-kept clothes shipped from the East. Even Wild Bill Hickok, which I think we talk about him later. He dressed as an Easterner, not a cowboy. Like he was a cowboy and that's not how he dressed. On a typical day, most people in town were working, not just milling around on the streets or hanging out in the saloon. Because, again, cowboy movies, I don't watch a lot of them, but I know they have just people sitting in the saloon. People are working hard. Most cowboys and gunslingers wore a sort of sombrero inspired by the Mexicans, not a 10-gallon hat, which you could see in those pictures I showed you. You know, this is not the hat that most cowboys wear today, okay? This is way more practical, and that's just, it kept the sun out easier. That's just how it works. And I also read, too, that they could use that style of hat to drink out of. I've read that. I think that was in your old, like the old textbook I used to have. And it said almost 1/4 of the cowboys were black. However, black cowboys have been excluded from popular accounts and Western films, so they're almost ignored in studies of the history of the West. So I am glad that our book included that because, yeah, that's something that people leave out. So do not forget to send me the code word. I hope you're enjoying this chapter because I am. Make sure you watch the video on cowboys and cattle drives and do notes, I believe. Yep, notes over the next section. And then I will see you back here on Wednesday with another video. Have a great Monday.